Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and with increased interest in the past number of years with farmers operating specialised dairy beef systems and some farmers operating a supplementary dairy beef system, I'm joined by Patton, Head of Dairy Knowledge Transfer Programme, to see what beef farmers should be looking out for next spring when it comes to sourcing quality calves for their beef system. Joe, you're very welcome. There have been big changes in the dairy herd in the past number of years. How many beef calves are expected to be born from the dairy herd in 2023?
I suppose, look, where we're at the moment, we're sort of coming to around 1.6 million dairy cows. So as we saw last year, actually, quite an increase in the amount of beef AI used because I suppose dairy herds are starting to settle a wee bit in terms of their scale. And also there was quite a bit of sex semen used as well. So when you count that up, if you take over the course of a year, like you're basically talking about, we need something around 25%, 30% of a replacement rate. So that you can basically say then that 70% of the calves born on dairy farms will effectively end up as beef animals. So like you can take 70% of 1.6 million. You do the maths on that. It's coming to, there's a lot of dairy calves. There'll be a million dairy calves basically that will be needed, that will be there, and obviously they're going to be a mix of dairy breed males, and then obviously your beef cross heifers and male calves as well. That's where it's at. Obviously we have exports to take out of that, but it's a lot of calves now, and I suppose it's represented too when you see it that there's about 60% of the beef kill now is coming from the dairy, ultimately coming from the dairy herd. So like it's a big chunk of the industry, the beef industry now, and will be into the future.
And there's a significant number of calves there to potentially be reared on beef farms. Do you expect this to change in the coming years?
I suppose we do. Yeah, I think that there's you can look at it that way. It's a resource. I know it gets a lot of press and maybe a little negative press at times around what's coming from in terms of calf numbers. But you think of it this way: we're kind of back, believe it or not, we're sort of back to where we were 40 years ago in terms of dairy cow numbers. Like if you go back to the mid 80s, we had 1.5 million dairy cows. Now we have 1.6. So there was a long tradition of rearing those type of calves in the country. If you go back 40 years or more, before your time and mine, I suppose, Catherine. But that was a system in place years ago, and maybe it's kind of back to the future a little bit on that we will see that. But I know, and I fully take the point that there's been a lot of press and a lot of issues maybe with in terms of what's going to mean for the quality of cows. But I think more and more we can see dairy farmers now beginning to look again at that and see that there is scope to when things have settled down in terms of the rate of change and on numbers on dairy farms, there is scope again to look at maybe using beef genetics with a little bit more in terms of beef, in terms of carcass quality and growth rate. So it's here to stay, I would say, as far as the sector goes and in industry goes, and hopefully we can see some improvement maybe in terms of the quality of calves coming through over the next while. And you can see obviously that there's a section of the industry would have always been using those beef, those higher merit beef calves, and those calves have proven themselves as being a very good option for beef farmers over the years. We just need to get more of them on the ground, I suppose.
Most definitely, and I suppose there's many aspects to be considered when it comes to sourcing these calves from dairy herds. What are the main tools available to farmers next spring when it comes to selecting these calves?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think maybe one of the big ones really, and there was good discussion on it last week at the ICBF event around breeding, is really the commercial beef value. So rather than just looking at breed, maybe that in time we're going to look at where there'll be commercial beef value available on the individual calf, which relates directly to the quality of the calf from a grower's or a finisher's point of view. So it's really based on the animal's carcass trait. So it's one to look out for in terms of the commercial beef value on the individual calf. And I think it's important we make the point that that's that's as important or maybe more important than just looking at breed, for example. I think that's one of the big ones. And I suppose one of the other things too, we talk a lot about breed and we talk an awful lot about commercial beef value and those type of things. But I think it's important to say too that the health, obviously, of the calf is a big one as well. And that, from a beef farmer's point of view, and speaking to some people that have really gone down this road in a more concentrated way over the last couple of years, they really have put a focus on the sourcing animals from or calves from dairy herds that have a good track record on animal health. So, herds that make a good effort on colostrum, that make a good effort with feeding calves properly over the first few weeks of their life when they are on the dairy herd. That's very important. So I suppose one of the things that we would be talking about through the beef programs, and you've talked about a lot yourself, I suppose, over the last while, is, the idea that you would try and source the calves from as few herds as possible and from a fewer more higher quality herds, I suppose, is where it's going. So I think that's a big thing. So, in summary, then it's really the commercial beef value is the thing for the calf, but also then really putting an emphasis on buying from trusted sources that that have done a good job in terms of setting the calf up for good health outcomes. I think those are the two big ones.
Yeah, I suppose up till now, really, the visual assessment was one of the few tools that a beef farmer had.
Yeah.
The commercial beef value, I suppose, is a relatively new concept, but what details within that should beef farmers be focusing on next spring?
I think the overall value in terms of itself, like I think on the dairy side, we'll be breeding for the dairy beef index, which takes calving difficulty and also the beef marriage into account. But the commercial beef value itself will focus more on the growth and the carcass traits of the animal. So I suppose when you look at it, calving difficulty is not much value to the beef farmer, because obviously the calf's on the ground at that stage. So it's more the growth characteristics and the projected carcass characteristics through the CBV or the commercial beef value is what's important. And it was very interesting actually last week when Andrew Cromie had just pulled out some animals and had to look at the CBV on some animals at the event in Carn last week, and you could see a pair of Angus's, one high CBV, one low CBV, and one a pair of Herefords as well. So taking the breed out of it, if you like. And it was clear from what we looked at there, like you could really see the visual difference in these were 20-month-old animals or thereabouts. You could really see that the high commercial beef value animals in both pairs really stood out in terms of, the visual quality of the animal, I suppose. Very difficult to pick that up, I would imagine. It's difficult to pick that up at a calf stage, but when you bring them on through, you could really see it on the older animal. And there was a bit of crack there last week about the fact that the calves that were the lower value calves, there was more paid for them, if you like, when they were smaller, I suppose. So it's important, I think, and it's, if people are trying to buy a bit of value and get a bit of margin through it, the quality of the calf certainly is what's needed from a breeding point of view, and your overall CBV value will cover that,
You're right. Like we've seen in previous studies that have been done, that there can be huge genetic variation within the breed of these calves, not to mention comparison across the breeds.
Sure. And that's the key point. I think that's the key thing. And, I can see that. And it's something that some of our own guys have been talking about for the last while. When you look at there's such a range in within breed, like you see weight for age or quality within reason, like there's such a range in weight for age, and a lot of animals behind weight for age targets, I suppose, but irrespective of the breed. But certainly, is a Hereford a good breed? Of course it is, but are there good Herefords and bad Herefords? There are good and bad Herefords, the same as any breed. Like you could take Angus, you could take whatever breed you want, Holstein as well. There's a range within breed, and I think that's the important point. So I think that bit of confidence, maybe just that you can identify, and pay accordingly for the animals you want. That's the key point, and not maybe not avoiding the thing of overpaying for animals that will maybe disappoint into the future. That's what the index is designed to do, which is a good thing, I think.
And what are you seeing being done now on dairy farms to improve the genetic potential of these beef calves coming from the dairy herd?
Well, the big one, I think, Catherine, is selectivity, actually, and obviously there's a lot of dairy, we have a bit large range within dairy herds too. Like some dairy farmers have become very conscious of this. Other people will be late to the party, and there's no point in saying otherwise. You will have a range there too. But for the people that are making progress, what are they doing? I suppose what they're doing is they're looking and saying, okay, I'm more stable now in terms of my numbers. So I'm looking to breed 25% replacement rate rather than a 35% replacement rate. So that's the first thing. So then they're going to use less dairy genetics, I suppose. And of the dairy genetics they're looking to use maybe more sect semen in order to produce heifer calves of fewer dairy inseminations, which is really creating space then for using more beef straws or more beef genetics. Okay, I think that's what we start to see coming through. So there's actually more beef AI being used and will be used over time. You can see there's big changes maybe in how people are looking at managing that. I think we can see too that more herds are going down the route of maybe automating their heat detection. So you have your collars, etc., or you have your systems like that. So that means that maybe they're going to use AI for a bit longer. So therefore, maybe be more selective on the beef bulls that they're using as well. So I suppose it was something Alan Toomey talked about last week and he's speaking at our own dairy conference around this, that for years maybe dairy farmers only put the emphasis, or a lot of dairy farmers only put the emphasis on calving ease. But maybe what people need to do a bit more of is look at the beef value or the carcass traits, the potential on those calves as well. So there are bulls out there that can prove relatively easy calving, but also improve the carcass quality of the animal as well. And it's those outliers within the system, in any breed, that people are looking for. So I think there's a bit more ambition to use a bit more in terms of quality, but we have to say though, in fairness, that considering how compact calving has got, and how in terms of just running the system for lots of dairy farmers, they're not going to compromise overly on calving difficulty. Really, like that's the reality of the situation, is that dairy farmers are not going to. They're not going to just decide to move away totally from calving difficulty. Very sensitive to that. So whatever happens in terms of beef quality has to happen while keeping calving difficulty as manageable. And that's just a reality. But as I say, within that, there's plenty of scope for choosing, and you can see that coming through now a bit.
And you touched on earlier the fact that there's an increase in the number of animals coming from the dairy herd. Like since 2010, there's a 10% increase in the proportion of cattle, which has moved from 47% in 2010 to 57% in 2020. This possibly likely to further increase based on what you've said.
Well, yeah, I think, look at it. I suppose that whatever the percentages, the raw numbers are going to be where they are. Like, it's going to be at in and around that level, or thereabouts. Like you can really see, and I think it is important to say that that we're sort of 7 years now since quota was abolished, but there has been such a huge change in the dairy industry over that time. But I think it's important to always remember that happened after 30 years of stagnation or decline in numbers, actually. So numbers had fallen for 30 years previous. So there was always going to be that correction, I suppose, in terms of cow numbers. But that has slowed down to a fair extent now. That has slowed down to a fair extent. So while there might be some small increase in numbers over years, the rate of change has kind of settled, and you can see more dairy farmers getting into a more stable system in terms of numbers. And when you've got that stability and you can reduce your replacement rate, the logical place to go then is looking, can you add value to the beef calves that's coming? So it's going to be that number. That's a reality of the system, I suppose. Some beef farmers might see that as maybe a threat to their system, but others might see it as an opportunity. So it is up to dairy farmers to use, to try and improve the quality of the calf. And I think we have put a lot of emphasis on that over the last number of years. And I think slowly and surely that will build.
And Teagasc have developed a new campaign focusing on dairy beef production systems, the new Dairy Beef 500 campaign. How do you see that promoting a greater integration between the dairy and beef sectors?
Yeah, it's an interesting campaign where we're looking at, so really putting a structure on the calf to beef type system that, previously had been there, and some farms had used it over the years. Again, like you look at that and what is it? It's one of the things that stands out really around sort of the calf to beef is that, and it has been highlighted a bit from time to time, that people tend to dip in and out of that system, Catherine. So buy some cows this year and maybe not next year, or try it and fall out of it, or for whatever reason. So maybe what that program is designed really to do is to try and, just make it a bit more structured, if you like. And I think the main things in that program are really I think the trading of calves or the sourcing of calves, I suppose that it can be made, that the beef farmers involved can source their calves from good sources that have, as we said previously, have good health, have good health management on their calves, good colostrum management, so that you're buying a healthy calf. But also then that there's a promotion on the dairy side that they would be a bit more ambitious on their beef genetics. So really, what's that program essentially about? It's about making sure that you've got a better bred calf that's very healthy leaving the dairy farm, and then when it reaches the beef farm, that there's a good system in place in terms of health and grassland management, and a focus on good weight gain over every day of the animal's life, so that ultimately that the animal can be got to slaughter at maybe a bit earlier age, and can be done with a bit less purchase feed going in as well. So that's the idea, that there's a good structured system on the dairy farm to produce the calf and put them on the ground healthy, but also on the beef farm that there's a very good and clean rearing protocol put in place to make sure you get good weight gain every day through the animal's life.
And this is something that will be covered in detail at the dairy conference.
Yeah, look, we're putting a focus on it on the dairy conference in terms of producing, better quality calves from the dairy herd. So, as we mentioned, Alan Toomey and Teagasc and speakers from ICBF as well, we'll be looking at, setting the challenge for dairy farmers really, in terms of putting targets down for beef merit at low calving difficulty. So, what can be done there for dairy farmers to maybe to just ratchet up a little bit in terms of the quality of calf produced. We'll hear from a couple of dairy farmers as well that have been successful in terms of how they've marketed their beef calves. So Liam Long from Tipperary, and Peter Robinson as well from County Westmeath, who have worked over the years to sort of build relationships so they can sell directly to the calf to beef farmers, I suppose, and how that sort of win-win can work out there. And also, obviously, then we'll focus a bit as well in terms of the management and the guidelines for better calf health and welfare while the animal is still on the farm, because I think it's important to make the emphasis too that one of the big things for calf welfare on dairy farms is how the animal is managed while they're still on the farm. So Emer Kennedy will cover that as well. So look, there's challenges there. There's no doubt about it. Dairy farmers are they have and are beginning to take, give that the attention that it deserves. And I think that's why we have it on the conference program, really, is to try and to give that an extra push and see can we raise the ambition a little bit in terms of calf quality.
So next spring, for farmers interested in sourcing dairy beef calves, looking on the visual assessment, step one, and now the commercial beef value will be important to ensure that there is a market outlet for these calves from the dairy herd, and yet provide a business option for beef farmers.
That's the one. So look at, obviously, stockmanship tells you that you have to look at the animal, obviously, and the animal has to look clean and healthy and looks a decent animal. But the commercial beef value adds to what you can see with your own eyes in terms of, giving you some look into the future, I suppose, in terms of the quality. And then, as we say, that, being a bit more, for the people buying calves, that they can be a bit more sure of their sources, if you like, and make sure to source from farms that have put a focus on calf health, and particularly around colostrum management. And I think that stands out across any program we've run. This the healthy calf is the one that'll work for people. So that's where we'd like to see it going.
Thanks very much, Joe.
Thanks, Catherine. Okay.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Joe for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.